in the lower court, and the lower court decree of the Chancery Court is the lower court, who first made a decision in this case. They decided that the judge denied the petition of the adoption by McElroy's couple and awarded the custody of the child to Mr. T. So they acknowledged that they made a decision that this child concerned is really birth child of Mr. T. And this couple, McElroy's, they brought this case to the appeal and even tried to bring it to Supreme Court. That's why this case becomes so famous. Okay, let's see the argument of McElroy's. The adoptive parents, they are black and were interested in adopting a mixed blood Korean and black orphan from Korea. There are many orphaned, abandoned children in Korea. This is particularly true of children of illegitimate birth who had been sired. I'm not sure if this word can be used for human being, but anyway, this is court document by servicemen stationed in Korea. So you can see that the widespread common sense at that time in the United States about Korean orphan. Under social standards of Korea, a mixed blood child, whether it be Korean and Caucasian or Korean and black, is not accepted into their society. This is responsible for many unwed mothers deserting their mixed blood children. Abandonment myth. So they had been in contact with KoRoot adoption program in Oregon, which is a non-profit agency devoted to handling the adoption of orphan children in Korea by American citizens. A Korean orphan girl of mixed Korean and black blood, whose name is Kim Ji-young, and the date of birth is June 6, 1967, and this date of birth is same as Mr. T's daughter, was processed for adoption from the KoRoot International and sent to the McElroy's home. Okay, this is the brief argument by McElroy's, and this is argument by T. Kim Ji-young, in fact, is my daughter, is his claim. He was assigned to duty with the U.S. Army in Korea in April 1966, met a Korean girl named Kim, lived together, and Mr. T was transferred back to the United States. Kim was pregnant. On June 6th, she gave birth to a baby girl, and child name is K. Francoise T. February 1968, Mr. T returned to Korea in March, married Kim, and legitimated their daughter, and she had American passport as a United States citizen. In April 1968, Mr. T returned alone to the United States due to the delay in issuing visa and passport to his wife. Yeah, many stories, common stories. In March 1971, Mr. T learned that in July, his wife has abandoned their child, and the child was placed in an orphanage for adoption. So it was 1971, and this case is 1975. So you can, and the child was born in 1966. So that must be very, very difficult, time for this baby, I imagine. And this is our story of Mr. T. And here appeared the KoRoot record. And KoRoot record explained the typical orphan adoption procedure at the time. The record of KoRoot adoption program shows that Kim Ji-young was found on February 1971 in Anyang-up area of Seoul. That was really a long, long time ago, which is the same area in which K. Francoise T has been living and she was placed with Holt Adoption Agency for adoption as a mixed-race child. The date of birth is shown to be June 6, 1967. Yeah, the birth date does not change in this document. And it clearly indicates, but the record, this Kim Ji-young was found 1971 February, but the birth date is June 6, 1967. But the record is not clear as to how this information was obtained. Since the parents of the child were unknown, it was given the family name of Kim Ji-young. Arbitrarily, maybe. I think that process should be arbitrarily by the adoption agencies. So Korea has a civil code of a procedure governing the adoption of a child by non-citizen. Yeah, we talked about it in a previous lecture. I mean, in lecture in June that Korea legislated made up a special law only for the adoption by foreigners, by aliens. That law title is orphan adoption special procedure law, and maybe this is referring to that law. And this procedure was followed in the placement. They are clearly saying that they were following the rules and laws of Korea. And the procedure was followed in the placement of Kim Ji-young for adoption by McElroy. The chronology of this procedure was as follows. Yes, this is typical procedure described by Holt International. In July, he was found on February 15, and July, the family name of Kim Ji-young was established, which means it was given by District Office of Seoul City. On July, only 2 days later, Kim Dekwang-kim was appointed as a guardian by the mayor of a special city of Seoul. We actually talked about this procedure before. I'm not sure if you remember this or not, but anyway, this is this name. Everybody is familiar with this name. Korea has 3 big adoption agencies: Holt, Eastern, and what is it? It's Korean 대한사회복지회. Yeah. And he is the founder and ex-head of adoption agency, Eastern. So almost automatically, the guardianship of orphans, intake by adoption agencies, the head of adoption agency becomes the guardian of children. And Kim Dekwang was the founder and the ex-president of Eastern, and now her daughter is the president of that adoption agency. On the same date, the July 22nd, maybe the district office of Seoul City issued a new birth certificate or orphan certificate to this baby, and that's how, so was established means that they were officially registered. And only 2 days later, this person became her guardian, and on the same date, he executed a consent for her to be immigrated to the United States for adoption by suitable parents. In this same document, same day, he transferred to the Holt adoption program, which is in the United States, all of his rights as guardian, including the right to place her in an adoptive home and to consent to adoption. So this was the process. Everything, every power to give consent and place this child can be transferred like this, automatically, almost automatically. And here's continued 26, the chief of office, Mapo District Office. Mapo District's office, this is where an adoption agency, the concerned adoption agency is situated. Seoul, Korea issued the following certificate upon the request of the KoRoot adoption program. Yeah, this is what is written on the certificate. This is to certify that the following described child is a legal orphan, abandoned by its parents, and that said child is non-successive orphan. This is really a tricky word, non-successive orphan. There are so many things to say about it, but yeah, in this whole another session. Anyway, this is to certify that this child is a legal orphan. Okay. And 1972, yeah, you asked about the period, how long does it take to receive a visa? So this is the July orphan registration established, and February next year, so it took about 6 months. Kim Ji-young was issued an IR4 visa, orphan, to be adopted in the United States, and on February, she left. 10 days later, after the visa was issued, she left Korea for the home of McElroy. So she was born in 1966, and left for and abandoned for placed for adoption, abandoned to the adoption agencies in 1970, and then 1972, she left for the United States, and the lawsuit was 1975. So I think that she stayed with this McElroy family for 3 years. So it must be hard for them that they have to, separate again. Anyway, the efforts of Mr. T to find her daughter, he really did a lot of effort to bring back her daughter to the United States. He learned that her daughter was at HORT agency. He contacted the HORT adoption agency in Oregon and sent them a picture of his daughter and a copy of her birth certificate, but received negative answer. He wrote to his congressman. Yes, that's the way it works. Use politics. And to President Nixon. As a result of this effort, the congressman received a letter from the State Department. I told you, State Department knows everything. They know everything, but they don't tell. The State Department of State has been informed by the American Embassy at Seoul, Korea, in response to its recent inquiry in this matter, that the child was issued an IR4 visa on February 1972 in the name of Kim Ji-young, and they know that this concerned child is Kim Ji-young. How do they know? I don't know, but they know. And they know that which plane she's on and which address she has gone. And my staff informed Mr. T of the foregoing by telephone on March 13th. So, during all those, with the result of all those fact findings, this court made a decision. Having personally viewed the child in open court, having viewed many photographs, firmly convinced that the natural child of Mr. T is the same child as that before the court. So, petition by the McElroys must be dismissed. Is natural child of Mr. T, and his former Korean wife, and that the parental rights of Mr. T have not been lawfully terminated. So this child is not adoptable. So you cannot submit a petition for adoption of this child. Upon this point, the court finds specifically that the father, Mr. T, never at any time abandoned said child, nor did they ever voluntarily surrender parental rights, nor in any way relinquish said rights voluntarily. But that's not the end of the story. That's not the end of the story. They appealed. McElroy's appealed. I do understand that it must be hard for them to be paired with her adoptive daughter, with their adoptive daughter, because they lived. We cannot be really sure, but according to the records, they lived for 3 years. And it must be hard to be part away the baby, but I'm not really sure that, because the court decision was so obvious, but the adoptive parents, McElroy's couple, they appealed. And I think that it is not easy thing for ordinary people to do things like this. Of course, HORT International was behind it, because you can see the court documents, many parts are from HORT International, and this is that's the reason of the appeal. The reason of the appeal that McElroy's assigned to the appeal court is that the court ordered as a matter of law in holding that the act of state doctrine does not apply in this case. What does this mean? Have you ever heard about the act of state doctrine? That's very, that's really a big word, act of state. Act of state, that's related with the sovereignty of a country. Act of state is a legal principle in British or American law, and also in international law. This is very basic legal principle that every sovereign state is bound to respect the independence of every other sovereign state. So we respect each other among, state parties. United States respect Korea, South Korea respect the United States, and Japan and France, they respect each other. And as a result, therefore, the court of a country will not sit in the judgment of another government's act. So the court of South Korea do not make a judgment on the act of another country's government. That's act of state country. That's act of state doctrine. And the courts should not judge on the act of sovereignty of other countries. But this is adoption petition, adoption of a baby petition. It's a family matter, but why act of state doctrine? And refusing to recognize the act of a foreign state, obviously it is referring to South Korea, and exercising jurisdiction on the act of a foreign state, which is reversed solely to the executive branch of the United States government. I think it's referring to the State Department by the United States country. Does it make any sense? Can you understand? English speakers, native speakers, can you understand this? And my interpretation is South Korea may use its sovereignty power. South Korea used its sovereignty power to make this child an orphan. South Korea said that this child is an orphan. So even with the appeal of a birth father, the decision should not overridden. That's the interpretation of this statement. I was like, and I was reading this, this case, and scratching my head. And in the process of adoption of the child, they were referring to the act of state, and the party that is saying about said about act of state is KoRoot. It's private adoption agency, and private adoption agency said that it's act of state. And where does this audacity come? They are so undaunted. Maybe KoRoot International thought they are part of the state. They are doing state job. And the answer of the court is too simple. We cannot agree. In order for the action taken by a foreign government to fall within the act of state doctrine, the action must have been taken by the sovereign nation rather than the subdivision of that government. Mapo district offices of Seoul City. That's subdivision of the government. The only action taken in Korea relating to the case of Adoptee was administrative action, not act of state, by officer of the Seoul, city of Seoul. Yeah, that's really short and simple action, but I don't think that it is. Really enough. I don't think it's enough. But anyway, that's a good reason because the act of state doctrine is so ridiculous in this case. So maybe the court thought that it does not really deserve such effort to write a good answer. But anyway, as I said, the appeal must have been pushed by KoRoot International. That's not, ordinary couple is claiming that you don't understand the act of a state doctrine, I don't think that kind of thing can happen in the appeal court of the state court in the United States. I understand that McGalloway couple must be hard. It must be hard to part away the child who was their daughter for 3 years, but bringing the case to the Supreme Court, this part means certiorari denied by Supreme Court means that they tried to bring it to Supreme Court, but Supreme Court denied to review this case, so it is settled as the Court of Appeal decided. That's the meaning of this. So they were even trying to bring it to Supreme Court. And what's the big deal of this case? I think it's my imagination. KoRoot International must have been shocked to witness that their orphanization process they have so elaborately systemized was denied by the court in the United States. And it was proved that the legal foundation of the establishment of the adoptability of the child through abandonment recognized by Korean government, that was the legal foundation of adoptability of a child in the US court. It turned out to be so fragile by the appearance of birth father. It's gone. Reviewing this case, I thought that if the adoption procedure between the two countries had been seriously scrutinized in the court or by any other competent authority, any adoption case would not have been so easily accepted. Because it is all based the same system. However, I think that KoRoot lost this battle, but won the war. Because after this case, orphan adoption procedure became more robust, both in legislation and in court procedures. Yes, that's my comment about this case. Anybody, if you have comment or questions at this moment?
Sorry, what was the last thing that you said? Became more lobbyist?
Yes, robust. I mean, it's more stronger. It
Oh,
became
robust.
stronger. Yes, robust.
Oh, yeah.
Stronger. Became the orphan adoption procedure after this case became stronger, both in legislation and in court procedure. That's why I'm saying that court lost this battle, but won the war. Yes. After this case, it was 1975. In 1976, I mean 1976, there was a whole revision of adoption procedure law in South Korea, which gives the adoption agencies the power not only in foreign adoption, I mean intercountry adoption, but also in domestic adoption. So their area of business and their area of power became bigger in South Korea, and inside the United States, there was kind of, in the academia journals about intercountry adoption between those two countries in this period, late 1970s and early 1980s, there were a lot of journal articles dealing with this issue. And seeing those articles, we can see that, we can witness that in many state courts or in many states' legislation, there happened some kind of compromise to apply kind of dual standard or easier standard or kind of fixed standard for the adoption process from orphans South Korea, adoption process of South Korean orphans. It's even not only systemized in South Korea, but also there established some kind of consensus or compromise in the state court process applied to South Korean orphans.
So what happened in this case? Did she get returned to her father?
Yes,
And then,
I think so, because that's the decision of the court. Yeah.
oh, but there's no known result of.
Yes, because this is only the court documents, so we can just imagine what happened afterwards. So we are not really know what happened after this story. I hope they live well. Okay. Is it good to move to another case? Another case is in 2012. 2012. I think Korea is totally different country after 1990s. We feel so, Korean people feel so, and actually that's what happened. In 2012, actually this story is, it's not really a court documents, as we saw in the McGalloway's case, but it's rather a story. It's rather a story than a case. But I think that it shows how deeply the orphan adoption is not only is systemized and embedded in laws and policies of both countries, but also it is really deep rooted in the culture and the mind of people of both countries. 2012 was the year when South Korea and the United States were facing presidential election in both countries. And historic adoption law revision that we talked about a lot was waiting to have the effect. And the reason that I mentioned about presidential election is that it was very politically sensitive period. And the top level of decision makers in both countries and the people in government worked and cooperated very intensively, and so it was not really usual situation. It's a very unusual situation, and in very unusual period of time, very unusual incident happened. It was not actually an adoption, but rather it was a trial to transfer a baby from a small southern city of Korea to a metropolitan city of the United States. An American woman wanted to adopt a child from South Korea, and he asked KoRoot International, and KoRoot International rejected her because her age was over the adoptive parent standard of the agency. And she received a legal advice from a lawyer of the United States, and who is Korean. This lawyer is American lawyer, but Korean. The lawyer gave the guidelines to adopt a Korean child as follows. Get the consent letter from the parent of the child that you want to adopt, and bring the child to the US through visa waiver program. You know what is visa waiver program? Visa waiver program, you can enter and stay in the United States for a short period of time for tourism or visit your relatives. So that's the program that you can go to the United States without applying for visa. And bring the child into the United States through a visa waiver program and get a guardianship from a state court, and then adoption decree based on the consent of the birth parents. It is too simple to be true. Yeah, it's a lie. It's not true. You can adopt a baby from South Korea like that. But that was the lawyer's advisory opinion. So I don't understand why and how, but she believed in it. And she put this advice into real practice. And she was connected with a Korean pastor, and through him, she found a girl born to a young underage mom who was under the protection of a welfare facility for the unwed mothers in a small city of Korea, this city. And this is chronology, very brief chronology what happened. On June 4th, 2012, a baby girl was born in South Korea and registered her birth on June 14, 10 days later, and applied for the passport on June 19. Please remember that such a small baby usually do not get an independent passport because such a small baby, when she needs to travel, it must be with protectors or with legal guardians who are her parents. So usually, such a small babies have their passport just attached to the parents, one of the parents, just attached to picture of the baby, and they travel with the same passport of the parents. But she applied for an independent passport on June 19th, and the birth mother wrote a consent on June 26th, and all those papers were translated and notarized by a local law office of this city. And now I would call this American woman is Mrs. A. And June 28th, 2012, she got Mrs. A arrived in Korea before the birth of a baby, and she got over the baby as soon as she was born in the hospital and prepared for the papers and got on the plane bound for the US, holding the baby in her arms. And on June 28th, she arrived at an international airport of the United States, a metropolitan city, with a baby only 24 days old, having Korean passport only, and there was nothing to verify the relations between this alien baby and the US citizen woman. The CBP, US, the CBP is Customs and Border Protection of the United States under the Homeland Security Department. Every airport, international airport, has a CBP. Yeah, the CBP deferred admission of the baby because this baby does not have appropriate document to enter the United States. Deferred admission of the baby about 10 hours, but allowed physical entrance because she was too young to be held in airport detention. So, from that moment, her legal status, the baby's legal status in the United States is unaccompanied alien minor. Have you ever heard this legal term? Unaccompanied alien minor. It was a really big issue in the United States under the Trump regime. Yeah, because, Trump brought all those underage, young children suspected as illegal. Yeah, the human rights activists say that calling a person illegal is illegal. But anyway, the illegal immigrants, so-called, and they separate those children from the parents and put the title unaccompanied alien minor and brought them to a detention center in the United States, which is really horrible. And that was really a big issue these days in the United States. But, this baby's legal status in the United States is this unaccompanied alien minor. Unaccompanied means that without parents. Alien means foreigner, and minor is underage. And from that day, the body of the baby was cared by Mr. A without any legal remedies with unlawful status. And if the baby was, just imagine that, what happened in the airport if the baby was big enough. That girl was big enough. And she must have been deported at that, in the moment. She cannot enter the United States. And from that day, from this day, June 28th, and until March next year, there was really a long and complex lawsuit in the federal court and the state court in the United States, and family court and administrative court in South Korea. So that's basically 4 courts involved in both countries. And what are those lawsuits were seeking was what to do with this baby. You know, what are you going to do with this little human being? And it took such a long time to find out the answer. You know, and the lawyer who represented the South Korean government in the United States federal court told me that their researchers tried to search for similar cases, but they could not. So this case was literally uncharted one. But I can't imagine that this or all of these things happened from a simple desire of a woman of a powerful country, citizen of a powerful country, that she just want a baby. And from that point, all of this began. Okay, so I'm going to briefly explain. I'm going to try to briefly explain what happened in those courts. And on arrival to the United States, because she had such a big turmoil in the airport, just think about it. Imagine it: 10 hours detention in the airport, holding that small baby. And so she must be panicked, in a situation of panic, and she tried to get the legal status to custody of the baby and submitted a petition for the guardianship of the baby to the state court of the county she lived in. And the judge of the state court allowed interim guardianship and custody because the baby is so small and she needs somebody to take care of her, and custody to Mrs. A, and try to verify the consent paper that this person submitted to the court. That Mrs. A submitted a piece of paper to the court that this is the consent to adoption of the birth mother, so the state court needed to verify it. So during, in one part, by one hand, allowed interim guardianship, and by the other hand, the Supreme Court judge, the state court judge, sent the copy of the consent paper to the U.S. Embassy consul in Seoul, Korea, and asked for the verification of the paper and the official notarization by the embassy. And this time, it is the turn to U.S. Embassy in Seoul to be surprised. And it is so natural for the judge to send those papers to some public authority who can verify it. And the judge thought that it is the Korean embassy. U.S. Embassy in Seoul. The judge wants to verify that the consent is really voluntary relinquishment from free will, without any coercion or under pressure, or it was written after the appropriate counseling from experts, and if it was really informed consent, the judge wants to know many things, but there's nobody who can really answer for that. And it was just a piece of paper that in a strange character, the Korean word, the US judge cannot understand what is written in Korean word. And it's just a piece of paper and some red something, that looks like a fingerprint on it. So who can really understand what it is? And moreover, it does not fit for the legally requested form of consent to the adoption court in the United States. So they need to verify it and make it, fit for the legal regulation. The consuls of the US Embassy in South Korea refused to this job because they know very well that this is illegal in both countries. And they do their own fact-finding to the unwed mothers' facilities, welfare facilities in that small city of Korea. And they reported it to Korean police, and they reported it to Korean government, and they did whatever they can do except answering to the state court judge's demand. That was what was going on until November 19th. November 19th, CBP, they just let the child be cared by Mrs. A, and this day CBP tried to take the position of the baby and bring the baby to the care of ORR. ORR is Office of Refugee Settlement. ORR, Office of Refugee Settlement. It's a very notorious place in the United States. And this is under the Department of Health and Human Services. And basically this is detention center. And that's not the place for such a small baby. And actually, people in the US, they said, at the time, they said they have foster care system, but we really don't know where these people brought the baby. And this is what happened in the United States. And meanwhile, South Korea did not know anything about the presence of this baby. But the first chance to stop Mrs. A's trial, basically Mrs. A should not be able to bring the baby out of this country because it has to be stopped at the airport. And the first chance to stop Mrs. A trial would have been the immigration stand in the Incheon airport. And Incheon airport, every year, it spread out propaganda that it was awarded the most efficient and most convenient international airport in the year. And this woman, this American woman, did not have any difficulties to bring out of the country, to bring out a Korean baby out of the country. The baby was only 24 days old with independent passport and without any appropriate visa, and in the hand of a US citizen who could not prove any relationship with this baby. But it was possible. And when this incident was revealed, later, the Ministry of Health and Welfare requested for more protective measures to prevent reoccurrence of such cases to the Immigration Agency of Ministry of Justice. And the answer was no. Yeah, that's the reality. That's the reality of Korean law and system, even nowadays. It clearly rejected the request, saying that they don't want to apply such measures in order to maintain the speed and convenience of the airport. They thought that speed is better than protection for the reputation of the airport. So, this November 9th CVP action really triggered the war between this woman against both governments. The next day, Mr. A submitted an emergency petition for habeas corpus relief. Habeas corpus relief means bring back the body to me. Yeah, bring back the body of the baby to me, a petition to the federal court against the Secretary of the Homeland Security, because CBP was the party that removed the baby from Mrs. A's house. And the federal court judge said that the care, custody, and guardianship of a child is under the jurisdiction of the state court according to the best interest of the child principle, so it depends on the state court's decision whether the child should stay with Mrs. A or not. Think about, just remember what we have said in the previous lecture. Here, adoption decree is under the jurisdiction of a state court, and the immigration, nationality, under the jurisdiction of the federal court. This is division. It's not federal court, federal government is higher than the state court. There is no something like that. It's not something like that. That's division. So federal court cannot override or reject the decision of the state court. So what the federal court judge said was, this is not my jurisdiction. So the state court decision about in regards to the custody of the baby is important. So that's, and the state court decided that considering the age of the baby, she should not be taken care of Mrs. A. She is the only mother the baby knows from birth, and the federal court ordered ORR and the federal government to send the baby back to Mrs. A's home until all the legal matters in regard to the baby was settled down. So I think this is basically a good thing, to stay with Mrs. A for a time being, then put that baby into ORR. And the US government asked the Korean government, I think this is really, weird situation. US government really knows that this is really a risky situation for the baby, and she cannot stay there, and maybe a natural adoption or naturalization process would not happen because the legal status of this the current legal status of the baby. They know it so well, but they say that if you want, the South Korea want the baby back, then you have to intervene to the court procedure in the United States court, in the United States. It cannot be settled down between the government relations because it is already in the court. So US government asked the Korean government to intervene the court procedure in the United States if you really wanted to take the baby back to South Korea. That's a really ridiculous situation, but it's South Korea's, in part, it's South Korea's fault because, what happened in the Incheon airport? They can stop it. They could stop it if they have really, I'm not sure if it's they or we, but if we have really an appropriate child protection system, the baby had to stop at the airport. But it was really hard situation, but from this time, mud battle of consecutive lawsuit was going on and on until the March next year. And we had to go through all those 4 court procedures. Maybe in the United States, they call it due process. But anyway, we need to go through all those uncharted case of court decisions to get the answer. But the answer was so simple. The answer was so simple. It cannot be no other way. State court decided that Mr. A made harms. Mr. A harms and did damage to the best interest of the child of the baby because she really took the chance of the baby to be raised by her birth parents or adopted in South Korea first. All those opportunities and all those child protection measures did not have any chance to be applied for the baby because she took the baby illegally, transferred illegally to the United States. That is so simple, but it took so many time to get to this result. And adoptability could not be established. We have, talked a lot of adoptability. So adoptability could not be established because the baby was under the guardianship in South Korea and word of ORR. So under other people's or other people's legal guardianship or parental rights, there is no adoptability. And the federal court, GAR, have you ever heard about this word, guardian ad litem? Guardian ad litem is a special legal expertise that a court appointed to deal with, to make a decision about the best interest of a child. So when the judges think that they cannot make a really expert knowledge or decision for the best interest of child, they invite an expert to the court to give advisory opinion. And the GAR was appointed for the protection of the child. And the GAR requested, okay, the baby is going to go back to South Korea, but for the least harmful movement, as few steps as possible, which means that this baby does not go to orphanage to South Korea again or go to, under the care of another person again, but go directly from Mrs. A to adoptive parents in South Korea. Yeah, that was the requests from federal court of the United States for the welfare, for protection of the welfare of a baby of South Korea. It was really a hard procedure to get to such a simple and obvious result. Yes, I really cut down many details and just to share some points about these cases that I want to share with you about these cases that for such a long time, 67 years, no court have been so scrutinized or contemplated on the adoptability or best interest of a child in inter-country adoption So I think if they did same efforts in the past, maybe they reached the same conclusion. And I would not say the reason that I keep this story as simple as possible is that this baby is living somewhere in South Korea. Maybe she does not know because this story was really reported in many news media reports in the United States. It was really hot at the time. But I hope that she's living peacefully somewhere in South Korea. So I did not share many details of this particular persons of this story. But during this time, I met a reporter from the United States, an American man, the reporter of a very powerful and conservative U.S. newspaper, and his words really remains deepest in my mind. And he asked for an interview, and at first I really tried to avoid it, but I could not, and I met him. But actually, he didn't write the story, and instead he did a big fight with me, and he told me that you are not trying to protect the welfare of the child. Because I was in charge of this case at the time in the government. So you are not trying to protect the welfare of the child. Everyone knows how many children your country sent out, and now you are sending lawyers to the United States to bring back just one baby. And he said it's ridiculous. And he asked me, what's the meaning of that? And then his last word is, the real thing is that you are trying to protect the monopoly profit of the adoption agency. Which means that this baby was transferred out of the control of the adoption agency to the United States. But the person who transferred the baby looks very good, because actually she does not look bad as the parent of the baby, and that's why she opened her house to the media when she did such a lawsuit battle with U.S. government. And without adoption agencies, if you can do such a fine-looking adoption, or maybe that's why that the reporter, he told me that you are trying to protect monopoly profit of adoption agencies. I was speechless and I could not answer back, and that's the end of story. Yes, it was the baby, only one baby who returned to Korea. But that very year and the next year, and still now, hundreds of babies left this country. So he may well ask, what's the meaning of all this? Yes. Yeah.
I just have a sort of comments and questions. First thing is, why was this woman not prosecuted for kidnapping? Because that's basically what she did.
Because the Ministry of Justice and federal DAs in the United States, they decided not to do that. Because already losing the baby is a big punishment for her. So they just decided not to do that.
But a baby that was not hers and that she, in actuality, kidnapped.
Yes, that's what we have argued that. And it is also the case in South Korea too. And South Korea police and the prosecutor's office, they decided not to indict her.
Okay. The other thing was about that you commented much about it not being stopped at Incheon Airport, but you know, I think for those of us who grew up in Western countries, whether they be American or European, but let's say for, in racial terms, white country, there's something that exists called white privilege. And I'm sure that if a person of color had tried to bring that baby out, it would have been scrutinized.
I'm not sure, because if the people in the immigration stand in the Incheon airport said that they are not obliged to scrutinize and stop those cases, that's because they have no regulations in regards to that kind of cases. So it is the law and system and regulation case problem. If they have guidelines or regulations in the immigration process that if somebody who are foreigner and take under which age children with this person, in these cases you have to stop them and then scrutinize them. If they have such regulations, they will follow it. I think, that's the rule, because they are public officers. They have to follow the rules. But the fundamental reason is that they don't have such regulations. I'm not sure if they still don't have it, but at least at this moment, 2012, 2013, they don't have such regulations. Yeah.
Okay, and then I guess my last comment is that, or question is, or doubt is, how is what the adoptions agencies are doing as agencies not comparable to what this woman did as an individual? Basically, more or less kidnapping.
I didn't interview or ask about this to adoption agencies, so I'm not really sure what their opinion is about this. But I heard that somebody from HORT International did an interview with a U.S. media that they support the measures from both government, and these illegal practices should be prevented. That was their very natural and basic attitude about this incident. Yes, and we are back. When there was a law revision in 2012, there was two big issues about that adoption procedure law. One is about the actual procedure of adoption of children, which can be applied to the person who were born in this territory after 2012. And another point was about the right to origin, right to know their true birth documents, and right to know their identity, and right to access to the documents of their birth, which is possessed by adoption agencies, and it still is. And we are saying this is adopted person's right to know his or her origin. This whole lecture was focusing on this fact. South Korea deliberately violated adopted people's right to know their origin by devising and leveraging laws, policies, and practices that encourage the erasure, distortion, and fabrication of adoptive children's origin, birth documents, including birth documents. That's the fact. So it's the source reason that adoptees' person's right to know his origin is violated. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do about this? What we have to do about this if this is really systemized crime? And we talked a lot of receiving countries' responsibility. I talked a couple of times that State Department know everything. I think so, that they know everything. They know everything that we don't know. Then what about the receiving countries' responsibility? Not only United States, but other European countries. Other European countries, I don't think they are really transparent and decent system in regards to this adoption procedure, because basically what we have talked about is the same system that applied to all those adoptions out of Korea. And adoption is lifelong. It did not end when a child was adopted. So, how to rectify the legacy of orphan adoption? That's what I want to ask. Do you really agree that adopted persons have the right, human rights, to know their origin? And it is human rights that should be entitled by national law? Do you really believe it? And it's the end. You maybe, find the document that distributed about the workshop after this lecture. After this lecture, there will be a 2-session workshop, 2 full-day workshop about adoptee activism, lessons learned, and moving forward. Adoptee activism, lessons learned, and moving forward. If you feel that this is systematic issue to be corrected, to be rectified, then it cannot be done by individual efforts. That's why many human rights groups in the world, they do activism. And if you try to make any changes in such a legal system, right holders' voices are most important. So Korean people need to hear what the adoptees, the right holders, are saying. by their voices. So this 2-day workshop is going to deal with adoptee activism. There were adoptee activism in the world, and they made some achievements, and there was limitations. So we are going to looking back what was achieved and what was the limitation, and then we are going to try to talk about what we should do to make a real change about this. Yes, this is the end of my presentation, and I welcome your questions or comments, and I encourage you to register to participate to the workshop if you want to hear more things about some kind of practical things, because in this lecture you just heard a lot of information and a lot of things what has happened in the past. So I am saying that something's wrong, and I think that obviously you have questions. So what? And we are going to deal with that so what part at the workshop, hopefully. Yep. Questions, answers, questions, comments?
No questions? Maybe it's a great lecture, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you very much for your great lecture. Thank you. Here is our schedule. October 31st, Saturday. The second floor of this building, is it right? 2층, 여기 2층에서? Yeah, second floor of this building, there is a rooms for workshops. So, not to come to KoRoot. I'm asking you. Anyway, the place is here. And the agenda, maybe. And then 7th of November, the second workshops. And then maybe this is the end of this year's dialogue. Hopefully you have been enjoying until now her lecture and the second workshop at 2 days workshop, and today the third part as a special lecture, and then in 2 weeks, 31st and 7th of November, the process for the workshop. I hope, hopefully, together with Dr. Kyung-eun, and finding a kind of the way to build up the activism, probably based on this knowledge. I hope. What else? Actually, what she explained about the last case, it was 2012, and it was known for Korean society because it was in newspaper. And then in the evening table at KoRoot, I told her what the situation, and our governmental officer went to the Chicago, and in the middle of legal battle, and all the adopted people from the USA saying, no hope. To me, saying no hope. America never lose a child. A child is already arrived in the States. Maybe the media is heavily attacking the action of a Korean government or her procedure. But we found she brought her child back to Korea. It is nobody believed. It means even legal process, maybe Korea will lose. That is those time, the people in, maybe people in KoRoot, all the adopted people from USA told me, but I didn't know. I also probably, you are right, I don't know, because the power unbalance between Korea and USA, how the legal procedure between both countries, Korea will win, something like that. But this is maybe very much we need actually. It is not to win lose. It is focusing on what is child right. That is maybe America and Korea has a consensus. That's why the child brought back to Korea, I suppose. That's why this is a kind of the sign that we can do further. Not simply, anyway, for Korean side, kind of symptom, how we can do in between America and Korea. We always losing, even sending children is also losing position for Korean society's mindset. Anyway, again, thank you very much for your lecture, and also, yeah.
In your opinion, the only difference between the, I would say, the adoption process through like a halt or the likes, and the last case you presented is really that there was no official court record that this child could be adopted, or like, because I understand from like, if I were the US, I mean, I can see there's an unaccompanied child coming into my country, and I would probably put it into like alien minor status, right? Because I still need to verify what the status is of that minor. So it should have never left Korea, I guess. But if the woman had obtained somehow a legal document, like a court document, then in that case she would have been probably being able to adopt the child, in your opinion?
Frankly speaking, I'm not really sure. Because this case drew so much attention from government and from media, and yeah, it became an international issue. So but if it is not the case, I really not sure the result would be the same, because this lawsuit cost so much. We need a bunch of lawyers, they are like, several hundreds $100s an hour lawyers. They worked for it. But, if you don't have such means for a case, I'm not sure what kind of a result would be brought out, even it is the same situation. But as you see, the border of South Korea is so weak for the protection of the child, so nobody knows how many children has sneaked out of this country. So that's my frank answer.
So you are the issue that there's like weak protection of the child. Basically, you make it, as a Korean government, you don't protect your own citizens from being abducted and brought overseas, or wherever. I mean, that's basically
right.
challenge.
That should be the work
Right.
of a Ministry of Justice.
Right.
But they are not. They are so busy doing other things. I'm not sure what they are doing. But the Ministry of Justice attitude is not really care about the rights of the child in this. I think that's one of the legacy of the orphan adoption history that this country has experienced so long. So, the function of the government, it does not fall from the sky, or it just appear out of the blue. It has to experience to learn how to do it. When you see the history of European countries and the United States, it was 1980s, 70s that they had made a real progress about the policies and measures, government measures for the protection of the rights of the child. So it was not in the tradition of a certain country, the rights of the child, protection of child protection systems. They have to learn, they had to learn. But Korean society, I think that this country lost the opportunity, such opportunity, because we solve, I'm not sure that if it is appropriate to call it a problem, but anyway, we just solve this issue by sending out of the country. So that was the real damage done to us, all of us.
Hello? Okay. So your last question about the rights to know origin, I mean, is that a real question? I mean, because in my mind, that's not a real question. I mean, that's like without a doubt, we should have the right to know our origins.
Yeah, but you know, how far would you go is kind of a question. Because if you say that it is not individual or is personal, but it should be kind of collective. So, but collective action. But if you, in order to make a collective action, it is not an easy procedure. We need consensus, and if you can establish a common purpose to act together and devote some time and action together for the same purpose, I think that is not a really easy procedure to do as a group. So that was my question, and that is going to be a issue that we are trying to find a way in our consecutive workshop next week. Yeah. Is it
It's reminded me actually Ho-jung asked something previous time. One small question is the infant may not have an independent passport like this case. Whether the Korean Foreign Ministry check this point and changing the process, or the person who issued in Foreign Ministry for this child on independent passport was got penalty? That is my small question. Administrative failure?
I'm not sure about that, because you know it is not such an easy question, because how small a person is, he or she should have freedom of movement is human rights. So there must maybe some reasons to travel without parents, I admit, but there should be some kind of, protective measures to make sure that this baby's safety, the baby's safety and life and welfare should be ensured by some public authority. What is lack in Korean legislation is that kind of intervention by public authorities. This is the obligation of the government to protect the safety of its minor nationals. But this government is really stepping back and always saying it's the obligation of the family, is the parent. And during that case of 2012, an official in Ministry of Health and in Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I'm not sure if I should say this or not, some official in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he told me that that's the fault of her parents. And her mother, her birth mother, made her to be transferred to the United States. And why should the Ministry of Foreign Affairs use its manpower and resources to protect her? It's her parents' faults. Therefore, it is the baby's faults. Kind of attitude. It is personalized. It is individualized. It is not, So that's why I'm saying that it is going to be really difficult, the dialogues with adoptees, between adoptees and the Korean people. Because adoptees, they know what it is like in advanced countries, where the child protection system is settled down. But in South Korea, the reality is not what looks like nowadays. So it would be very difficult to understand the reality of this country, and there may be very huge gap of understanding of the human rights and child protection system.